could you tell us the role of Posada and this other fellow Bosch in that attack?
Well, we know, it's not a secret what happened aboard that plane, John. Documents tell us, not documents from Venezuela, documents from the United States Intelligence Agency tell us, documents from Trinidad and Tobago, where the two bombers who were aboard that plane who actually placed the bombs were captured. These documents tell us that Posada Carriles, Orlando Bosch, Hernan Ricardo, and Freddy Lugo conspired in Caracas to purchase the plastic explosives that were placed aboard that plane. Days before the downing of the plane, Posada told a CIA source in Caracas, as reported by a CIA cable, that he was going to hit a Cuban airliner and that Orlando, namely Orlando Bosch, had all the details. No one in Washington notified Cuban authorities of this impending attack. We have confessions from Freddy Lugo and Hernan Ricardo, the two Venezuelans who were captured in Trinidad, who admitted having worked for Posada Carriles, being trained by the CIA, being trained by the Venezuelan Secret Intelligence Agency in explosives. We have phone calls that were placed by these individuals to Caracas trying to reach Posada and Orlando Bosch in Caracas, telling them in coded words what had happened. They said, the bus has crashed and the dogs are dead. That was a code that was agreed upon. The bus was, of course, the plane, and the dogs were, of course, the passengers. We have vouchers from the company, an intelligence company that Posada ran in Caracas, showing money that was paid to Freddy Lugo and Hernan Ricardo to down the plane. I have the calculations of how much money each of these lives were worth. They were paid $25,000 to blow the plane. 73 people were murdered. That means that each of their lives cost $342.47.
Okay, that's José Pertierra. He's representing the Venezuelan government in their extradition case for Posada. Let me shift now to IPS fellow Saul Landau. Saul wrote a piece in Progresso Weekly a couple of months ago that traces the origins of Posada and the people he worked with in the numerous terrorist acts that have just been laid out by José Pertierra, way back to the Eisenhower administration. I think most Americans think of the U.S. getting involved in efforts to get rid of Castro. They associate it with Kennedy and the Bay of Pigs. You put it back to Eisenhower. Could you explain what your rationale is on that?
Well, the rationale has to do with the facts, John. Before the Cuban revolutionaries marched into Havana triumphantly in January of 1959, the United States Embassy had been colluding with a series of generals and admirals in Batista's armed forces to organize a military junta to take power so as to prevent the revolutionaries from actually acceding to control of the government. This was under a General Cantillo. At the same time, in the Navy and in the Army and the police were hijacking boats and planes that belonged to the Cuban government and flying them or sailing them to the United States. These were Batista officers who would have been, of course, tried for war crimes in Cuba. When they got to the United States, they were not apprehended. Indeed, they were treated sort of as heroes. And the boats and planes were not returned. And no charges were ever pressed against any of these people for hijacking. All this takes place before January 1st, 1959. Following the takeover by the revolutionaries of power in Cuba, I think you'd have to say that the entire context of U.S. relations with Cuba can be summed up in one word: terrorism. That was essentially what U.S. policy was from 1959, and it, in a sense, remains that to this day. There were brief interludes where it had abated, especially under Jimmy Carter, but by and large, this was the total context of relations that the United States has had with Cuba.